Oh man, the beach. Like on Google Meets, you can do a lot of crazy stuff, like crazier than Zoom. So you can turn your face into television, like a
Mm.
robot, and follow you around. Pretty wild.
Oh yeah, I once had a friend who was like pickle.
Pickle Rick.
Yep.
Okay. Hi everybody, and welcome to what's the name of this podcast again?
The Alternative RPG Club.
Yeah, the Alternative RPG Club. And the name of the podcast is D&D Players Try Something Else. And last episode, we kind of talked about CoC, Call of Cthulhu, through a player's perspective. And this time, I'm joined by a very honored guest, GM Feroz.
Hello.
GM Feroz, would you like to talk about
Sorry,
yourself?
it's Keeper of Arcane Law.
Keeper of Arcane Law, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't use the word DM here.
There are no dungeons. Oh, there are some dungeons in Call of Cthulhu.
Some dungeon. Spicy dungeons. Better kind.
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about how long have you been Keeper of Arcane Law?
Hello, I'm Feroz. I run Call of Cthulhu. It's the main RPG I do. I've run it more than D&D, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, I have. It started on my birthday 2 years ago. That was the first Call of Cthulhu session I ever ran, and in that session, not a single supernatural threat was ever met. The players decided to go off the rails and try to abduct a nurse and end up in a high-speed police chase, and they all died. The crash, but one guy survived, and he was hanged for his crimes. Yes, and that was my first Call of Cthulhu game, and I think it went quite well.
nothing supernatural at all. Just
They were the horrors themselves. And that's the thing with Call of Cthulhu. A lot of games, the players end up being these crazy people. In Call of Cthulhu, it's more obvious for you to notice that because you are existing in the real world just 100 years ago. So you do still, it's easier for you to realize that, oh my god, this is against the law, as opposed to the lawless lands of the Forgotten Realms.
the lawless lands of D&D. Okay, actually, I think you touched on this a little slightly already, but let's get into our first question here. In general, what are some of the differences between GMing for COC and D5D? So you spoke about a little bit about player expectations. Easier to stay grounded, I would say, in COC.
Stay grounded and ungrounded in the best ways possible.
Explain.
It's the game master's dream to be able to get the players to control themselves without having to do anything. And I feel like Call of Cthulhu is one of the best games to humble a player. I don't mean this in a cruel way. In D&D, you often get carried away by the amount of power you have. And in D&D, you just get stronger and stronger, and your hubris gets so much more as you play. And you start off thinking you're hot shit, right? And then you realize that 90 in a skill you had isn't gonna save you from much. Because it's playing Call of Cthulhu, instead of getting stronger, you just get weaker and weaker. As in your player's psyche, the size of the cosmos just gets vaster.
Interesting. I think a lot of players expect, like, when I play an RPG, I want my character to grow stronger and stronger. It sounds like this is not the kind of RPG for them.
And maybe not so much in grow stronger as in I level up, I get higher stats. You do campaigns, you do improve your skills by a bit, as most people do in life. But I think there's a big thing of the theme of the knowledge. The more you know, the more you suffer. And so I suppose that's the alternative for it. Instead of getting stronger by getting rare loot, which you can get as well. Instead of getting a vorpal sword, maybe your character's got the fucking Necronomicon. Sorry, am I allowed to swear here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You've got the Necronomicon, or you have some amulet that makes you go insane, but you can look into another dimension briefly. And it's the high risk, high reward, like, stuff as you progress that I think makes it fun. Because you do end up getting destroyed. It's a madman's knowledge. It's like Bloodborne, like you get more insight whether you get fucked.
Yeah. For sure. Let's talk about a little bit more about player expectations. Normally, an adventure structure in 5e is I get the quest from the quest giver, I go kill some stuff, and then I get some. It's very different in COC. Do you want to talk more about that?
Let's talk about quest giving specifically.
Yeah.
In Call of Cthulhu. Okay, in D&D, right? When you receive a quest, it's usually because you are an adventurer. Because quest is something you do either for the greater good, for money, or because you're trying to take advantage of something, whether it's the quest giver or something else that the quest allows you to do. In D&D, because players always have their own agenda for it. In Call of Cthulhu, from what I've seen, quests often come from like a letter from an old love from a former friend, a funeral where you have to meet up, or
My uncle is dead, and
my
he's
uncle is
on his deathbed,
dead.
and he's called me to his deathbed. And
My
you want to find out?
He has left me a mansion to inherit.
Yes,
and
he is a lover.
Yeah, you don't have to look far. A lot of the original like quests and prompts ripped directly from like horror fiction. Yeah, you won't as often find, oh, the lady upstairs told me to go get her groceries. To be fair, that's still pretty fun. Because quest giving, when recontextualized to the real world,
Yeah.
I think is honestly so much more like interesting that you meet a stranger on the road and he asks you to buy his wares, as opposed to meeting some guy in like a 1920s speakeasy who tries to hook you into his bootlegging operation.
Hey, come clear the mine of orcs. That'll be fun.
Yeah,
Yeah. So another
unlike
thing,
from the police.
yeah, I think one of the things D&D players love to engage with is combat. In COC, there's this common, I would say, thought that if you go into combat, you've screwed up. Is that true?
If you go into combat in real life, you've screwed up, right?
Yeah.
I don't go to the bus stop and be like, yeah, this is where I'm succeeding in life. I'm starting a fight with the bus driver. I don't think it's as... It is pretty bad. You can die pretty easily. But I do think that makes it more fun. Because you're not just weakened, the other person is as well. You're both as fragile as people. And in every game, everyone always asks for a gun. Or
Yeah.
everyone does their best to justify that they do have one. And I usually let people have guns. Because I feel like it gets you into far more sticky situations and implicates you more to keep you in the actual investigation itself. If you had a gun. Because one of the biggest problems is trying to get a person to stay motivated to do something, as opposed to just leaving and saying fuck you to the horror.
Yeah.
If they have a gun and they need to further implicate themselves, then that makes them even more entangled.
So the gun is a trap.
The gun is a trap. Combat is a trap. I love when people engage in combat, because then I have them in my leathery claws even more.
Yeah. Would you say combat is really tactical? Like I can build like a min-max character kind of thing?
No. You could, but it's just not very much. If you were to pump all your stats into firearms shotgun, and you were to go into a shop and buy a shotgun, you'd be pretty strong already. You could probably kill a few creatures quite easily. But sure, now you're a great min-maxer. You're also the most wanted criminal in the country.
And also you can't kill a god with a shotgun.
No, but that's the thing. The stronger you are, at least like stats-wise or combat-wise, right? You can't just... You're not just passively the strongest man alive. But me too. Somebody will know. You are this buff Giga Chad walking down the street. Surely the people would notice. And it's the story implications of that makes it balanced, I think. If you are extraordinary in something.
Yeah. So I've gymmed a COC, just like a really short kind of starter campaign kind of thing. So about 3 or 4 sessions. And I guess what I observed was that in terms of player progression, it's not really about, what was I'm leveled up and stuff like that. It's about your character discovering more things about the world rather than, hey, I got 10 more points in this ability and now I can take this perk and now I'm invincible in battle and I cannot be surprised. Basically. So yeah, I think for players who are looking for a more story-driven kind of adventure, COC might be something to look forward to.
And also, I think almost one thing is that you're willing to let the character like degrade.
Yeah.
because it's quite masochistic in terms of like what you go through. And if you get too attached to who your character is or whether they're a good person, the moment you get 2 or 3 phobias, a lot of that can and will change.
Yeah. So don't get too attached to the idea of your character because it's going to.
Or at least be
Very-
willing for that character to just go down a
Yeah.
rabbit hole.
So in COC, when you evolve, your
The
character
character evolves. Definitely.
spirals downwards.
No, the character
Closer
devolves.
to that. Yeah. Okay, cool. I guess another conception that a lot of people have with COC is that my character is definitely going to die at some point. It's not a COC campaign unless somebody dies. How true is that?
Dying is the most boring thing that can happen in a Call of Cthulhu campaign. There are so many things more fun and more terrible that can happen to you than dying. Dying, if you die, you're lucky.
That's the end of the torture.
Yeah, as a player, you're unlucky, because you didn't get one of the many cool outcomes. You could have been like a slave or something to some elder god, but you just died. Yeah.
I remember playing a COC game with you, the one in the asylum. And I think none of us got a good ending out of that. We were all like lost to madness. Arkham itself turned into a portal to hell or something.
Yeah, you ended up being institutionalized until the Day of Reckoning came.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us at that game, it was something that was really fun to experience. A lot of us at the table were actually also D&D players. So it was a bit out of place in terms of expectations. Like you always in a D&D game is like at the end, oh, I saved the farmer from the goblin or something, and I get rewarded and stuff like that. But COC again, that's very different.
But even the happy endings are quite bleak.
Yeah, how much is lost along the way.
Yeah. No, I can't give away spoilers for my latest game called Hotel Regime. The last time I ran it, a bunch of players survived. The most number I've ever had survived. But
How many players were there in the game and how many survived?
so there were 5 players in the game. I think 3 in total survived.
Okay.
1 player got a great ending, player-wise, not character-wise. 1 got one of the cooler, like, tragic ends that you can face in Call of Cthulhu. That's not death. But one player I think just straight up survived after all that, and it will never be the same again. I'm probably gonna have
Alcoholism.
down the road, alcoholism,
Yeah, that's
suicide
like,
at some point in the next 5 years. But one player at the end just became a serial killer, because the character lost his wife.
Yeah.
And at this point, any woman who looked even remotely like his wife, he went into a frenzy. Yeah, and can spend the rest of his day looking for his wife and being this menace.
very non-heroic, but still sounds a lot of fun. And what's some advice you give D&D 5e DM who is looking to run his or her first COC?
D&D 5e DM.
It's all they've ever known.
So psychology is your inside check. Spot hidden is your perception for looking. Listen is your perception for hearing.
One of the things I found super important as a player, like after the first few sessions, was every first time player of COC underestimates how important library use as a skill is.
Yeah.
It's literally one of the most important skills.
It's one of the most like
It's not
lore
like-
heavy,
yeah.
knowledge important game.
Yeah, exactly. It's such like a knowledge driven kind of game. And usually
You
it's
need to look through documents, you need to
Yeah.
read like ancient grimoires.
yeah, and that's all library use.
Yeah.
So quick tip for players. Don't skimp on libraries.
Not all skills are made equal. 90% of the time, there's just going to be like a handful of skills that you'll always use.
Yeah.
What's fun is when you take a not very commonly used skill and try to justify it. It's
Yeah.
far better to get a player to try to say, can I use this skill to do this? As opposed to calling out the skill for them. Because if you as the GM have to decide what skill you want them to roll, you're probably just going to end up calling for spot hidden,
Yep.
psychology, just the same things over and over again. But players with that multitudinous occupation, maybe this one guy has like 80 in accounting, And by God, is going to use it. They find a way to use accounting to solve this problem.
I would like
as
to
opposed-
calculate the probability of this book being on this shelf.
Exactly. It's more creative for the player. It's more fun for everyone. As opposed to just calling for a generic roll.
I think you brought a pretty good point. How often do you dictate what skill to use to roll, and how often do you let the players just try and justify something? Because I feel like usually 5e is a very DM top-down heavy kind of structure most of the time, where DM is calling for the rolls rather than the player.
Yeah. Normally when the player asks if they want to do something, unless it's incredibly obvious what role it is, I usually ask, what do you want to roll for it first? I hear what skill they want to use, and then I decide if they can use it or not. So if someone says, can I break down the door?
Uh-huh.
At first, I just say, okay, use fighting brawl or like a strength. But if a player happens to be like a carpenter and they have the carpenter skill, then I'll ask them what skill they want to use first. And if they suggest they want to use carpentry, I'll be like, sure. If it makes no sense, I'd probably just go back to fighting brawl. But being a carpenter, I imagine you'd probably know some great way to bust down the door without needing to just use brute strength.
There's a carpentry skill?
It's probably under art and craft. There's no official carpentry skill,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of like sub skills that you can specify yourself.
I think
And there's blanks where you can just make up your own skills completely, and I'm allow you to take that. For like science and art and craft, you can put a skill specialization, right? So art, crafts, I'm a photography or whatever. But on the right column, there's a few like blanks down there for you to just make up any skill under the sky that you can come up with.
I think once I played seriously, my arts and craft skill was finger painting or something.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah. So that was a fun one that I tried to kind of input somewhere. Finger painting on camel paint on my face or something. And so that's what I came up with, I think. I'll try and pull up like a screenshot of what a CoC character should look like.
Yeah.
I think it can look quite intimidating to 5e players and DM because it looks like there are so many skills there. But to be honest, I feel like CoC is mechanically one of the easier RPGs to run. The hard part really comes from the lore and setting the mood of the game. You think so?
Yeah, I feel like the difficulty of Call of Cthulhu is just what the game is about.
All right, let's move on a little bit to what are some of the mechanics that are specific to CoC? Let's start with madness. How is that something that makes?
So if I may combine this point with the why D100 and why not a D20?
Yeah.
So Call of Cthulhu uses the basic role-playing system, which was invented by Chaosium back when they first made, I think, RuneQuest.
Yep.
I can't remember if it came with RuneQuest or they just made the basic role-playing system. So it's not a bespoke system tailored to Call of Cthulhu. So in that, I actually think Call of Cthulhu is not the most optimized narrative system. It's not perfect for the story itself, but it works fine, and it's worked great since 1981. Just like D&D. The D20 system, although synonymous with D&D, was not made, but it was made for D&D because it was the first one that came, but continues for multitudes of other RPGs as well. So the basic role-playing system, most of it is honestly generic. Why it's a percentile to roll for a skill, it just makes more sense that there's a percentage chance to pass, but that isn't Call of Cthulhu specific. So I think sanity is essentially the main defining aspect that makes Call of Cthulhu mechanically. Everything else you could port from any other RPG and it would work just as well. Sanity is just your second health bar. Your more important health bar. Like I said, hit points, you have 10 hit points as a person usually. They go down, you die. That's boring. But you have usually like 30 to 70 points of sanity that you begin with. And that sanity bar is something that you'll be playing with a lot. And you will be watching very closely. And sanity as a mechanic is the one thing that defines it. Because unlike any other horror system, mechanically there's no horror in the game. Aside from sanity. Sanity is where the keeper takes away agency from the player. So that's another thing that makes it a bit more masochistic for the player. Because normally it's a big thing for a player to have their own freedom, to be able to choose what they want to do, and for the GM to respect that. In Call of Cthulhu, that is not the case when sanity comes into question. Because the very act of sanity is you losing your agency, losing your control over your mind. And so whenever you fail a sanity check or whenever your sanity is compromised, I have control over you.
And how
Like
often does that happen?
Sorry?
How often does that happen? You taking control of the character?
Usually when you see something terrible happens to you, or if you are under the influence of eldritch forces. Yeah. It doesn't happen. Oh no. I mean, it can be used for comedic effect, of course. You go out, someone shits on you. Oh no, make a sanity check. But usually it's like you see a dead body, which most people aren't equipped for in day-to-day life. Because again, you are a normal person for the most part. You see a mangled dead body on your ceiling as you wake up. A number of people would shit themselves, literally. And that would be a very base level sanity check. That's a loss of control when the body takes over the mind, complete instinct. What's the most fun is because people always have guns. Yes, and people always ask for guns. Then you make a sanity check. Oh no, your finger slipped. A lot of misfiring is always fun in a game. Because you want to engage in combat with something horrific in front of you, and your mind is in its weakened state. Suddenly, your friend next to you looks a bit like a deep one.
Yeah. Hey, you look kind of sick.
Exactly.
Yeah. How far do you take it though? Because coming from as a GM, I think one of the things that players might take issue with is losing player agency.
Yeah.
Having the GM make decisions for you. Or how do you balance that?
The game prescribes vague parameters for it, I think. For example, I wouldn't be like, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I decide everything you do.
Yeah.
It's usually, it depends on the bout of madness that you roll or that I decide for you. Sometimes it's you leave, you just straight up leave combat, right? For the next 2 or 3 turns, depending on how badly you roll. It's not so much I just take over, it's more of you get some sort of like negative debuff.
Right.
That kind of loss of agency where you're just nerfed a bit. So sometimes you get a crippling fear of water. Anytime you see a glass of water or a stream, you will scramble to get away from it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, the player gets to roleplay that themselves if they take on the sanity effects. Every time they see water now, they will automatically be like, oh my god, I need to get away.
Yeah.
If they don't initiate like the debuff themselves, then usually I will call for like another sanity check to try to resist it. If not, then I will be like, okay, no, you panic. Yeah. I don't think I've not had any problems with it yet, I think. Or maybe no one just told me.
Yeah.
But
and no players were like, no, I'm a paladin. I'm not afraid of this.
I'm not scared of blood.
I've
Killed 5 men. Yeah. If it's like a mafia member, I probably wouldn't say, oh no, dead bodies, you're terrified of them now. I'd probably play it more to like a guilty conscience. So it is tailored to the character as well. It's not just anyhow, oh, you're now scared of spiders.
more just scared of spiders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to add about madness?
There was something. Can't seem to remember it anymore.
We'll get back to it later.
Okay.
Let's talk about my other favorite mechanic in CoC, luck.
Luck.
Yeah. So luck is like a skill that you initially roll for when you create a character.
Yeah.
And you can, and that's like your dice manipulations that pretty cool. So basically you can eat as much luck as you want to boost your roll by that number. And I really like it because it's up to the players to choose, okay, is this roll super important? Do I really want to burn like all my luck on this one roll? And maybe you really do. Sometimes you really do, and sometimes you don't. So that's always like a fun thing to play. Yeah.
So far, right? In all my games, I've used luck. Luck has been a saving grace, a set number of resource that you can use to just help yourself get out of pickles, because you will often find yourself in pickles. And a game that is essentially about an indifferent world, luck thematically is the only thing that can save you. No god or no power can save you.
What if I'm a cleric though? What if I'm a class turner did?
Channel divinity. But the thing is, luck in the games I've run, and I think in the games you played as well, right? Because they're only like 3-4 session games.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I see players use luck very tactically. Okay, I'll save all my luck for now. I'll spend it all on the last session because I know that's when shit will hit the fan. But in a campaign, which I haven't had the privilege of running yet, luck is something I imagine that people hold on to far more preciously. Because in a game where you know it's going to end in your characters, if you're probably not going to use this character anymore, you would just have like 70 luck. You can split that throughout 4 sessions and plan that very tactically. But when you're holding on to 60 luck, like for the next year of gameplay, right? I think that when like the real clenching happens, because now luck is the most like precious thing you have. You do regain like a number of luck every session with a dice roll, but it's still a constantly depleting resource.
It's like a D10.
As opposed to something you can just spend. Sorry?
It's like a D10, is it? Yeah, and
I think it's a D10. I don't remember. I've never had to do it before.
Yeah, so guys, luck doesn't really show on a short rest. It's a finite resource, but it's really fun. I think it makes the game a lot more. No, I wouldn't say a lot more, but a little bit more in the player's control sometimes.
You know what I think is more fun than luck?
What?
Pushing a roll.
Go ahead, tell us more about pushing a roll.
So, luck and pushing rolls are the two ways that you can help yourself. Luck, you spend the resource to succeed. When you push a roll, essentially on every roll you do, if you can reason it well enough, you have a chance to re-roll by saying like you try harder. If you can narrate well enough that you try harder, you can try harder. But if you fail the push roll, you fail even worse. And in a game like Call of Cthulhu, that's fun for the GM. Because just think of a way for this to go the worst it can. What's the worst that could happen is what happens when you fail a push roll. Okay, it's not that cruel. Like, the worst that could happen when you open a door is you break your toe, you fall screaming, you hit your neck, and you die. It's not the worst that could happen, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And usually push rolls happen during moments of stress.
And you really need to get that shot
Yeah.
and you missed.
And I always love being like the temptress. I like being the Faustian devil looking at players saying, would you like to push the roll?
Have you
ask, would you like to push the roll?
Have you tried Blades in the Dark?
I have not, no.
So one of the things about Blades in the Dark is also pushing the roll. Basically, you pay like some stress, which is your health in that game, to buy another dice. Your health is pretty limited, and there are very limited ways for you to like recover. And even after a single session, it takes some time. You don't immediately recover all your stress. But yeah, I run Blades quite a lot, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So just be like, that didn't go so well for you. Would you like to shot? Yeah,
just pulling them into screwing them over.
Yeah. And I think doing that in moments of stress is so fun because the players are so much more. They feel so agonized about whether they should take it or not, take that risk. And yeah, I think another thing that is really different running CoC and running D&D is the sense of stress and loss. Like potential loss is there. D&D, it's just whatever, you go down and just healing with you or Revivify or whatever, right? Seriously, you're dead. You're insane, you're like, that's it.
And I think it's more fun to fail in CoC.
For sure. Yeah.
In D&D, there's often a huge fear of failure.
Yeah.
I think it's been heavily built up, or maybe it's the nature of the game itself, where you just always want the D20. You always want to get the great thing. Yes. I don't know whether it's the game or the way Call of Cthulhu D&D has, that we've culturally hardwired our minds to how to think that in D&D, great things only happen when you get great successes, as opposed to how failure can be fun, which I think is often neglected.
Yeah.
So in a world of TTRPG where failure is a bad thing, in horror games, because they are horror games, I think failure in general becomes more acceptable by players.
Yeah.
Because you're playing a horror game, you want horrible things to happen.
Yeah.
If I
I
was
think
playing a horror game and I got all great rolls, I feel slightly disappointed.
Yeah. I think players
Whereas in
generally,
D&D, I always want the D20.
yeah, correct.
And
I think generally players are more okay with bad stuff happening to them as long as it makes things more fun for them.
Yeah.
In Yeah, where you mentioned D&D, I fail, what's going to happen? I fail this roll, I'm just going to miss. Nothing much is going to happen to me. But seriously, if I miss, that's quite hard because that thing or whatever is going to hit you and it's going to hit you pretty hard. So yeah, and I feel like, I guess failure in tabletop RPGs is not fun and failure. It's not really a new thing. I think even some D&D players might like that in their D&D campaigns, but it's not really specific to horror games itself. Yeah, I feel like it's just an idea that heroic fantasy has gone away from a lot of times, and that's the most popular RPGs in the world. D&D, Pathfinder, they're all heroic. They're both heroic adventures. So you don't really players who spend a lot of time with these kind of systems, they are not really accustomed to failure and understanding their joy in losing part of your character, or like losing your character entirely. Yeah.
I think
But
because failure is often felt like when you fail, like nothing moves forward. Like
yeah,
you said, when you fail, you just miss.
yeah,
Then the game, you stop playing the game.
yeah.
When you fail, just when nothing happens or when you just go backward in whatever you wanted to do, that's just not very fun. Whereas when you fail and something else happens, which either screws you over or screws somebody else over, that's a new problem.
There's a progression in the narrative, which I think is important.
Yes.
All right. And then let's move on to, we've spoken a little bit about the mechanics already, but I think it's an interesting point that you brought out there. This system is not really an exclusive COC thing. And it's
No.
only parts of the system that make it COC. So can I use this system to run something that's not horror or Lovecraftian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the system does depend on investigation, though.
Yeah.
Because you're given an intimidating number of skills that are very
Yes.
specific.
Yeah.
Library use. There's a difference between psychology and psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is the equivalent of healing, but for sanity. Yeah, if you want to run an investigative game, Call of Cthulhu is great for that. Like I said, the first session I ran, no supernatural at all. They were just doing 1920s shenanigans, which worked quite well for the system. You could use it for a mafia game or whatever, just as long as you don't use the Cthulhu Mythos skill. You could sub sanity for something else like corruption, which is a feature in like Urban Shadows and a few other games. Just the idea of a second health bar like sanity or corruption or purity or virtue or whatever it's a wonderful thing. I just really like when there's like a second stat that's important and more fun than
Only
just
one. I think you mentioned something about conceiving an investigation game. Can you expand on that idea? If I want to run COC, does that mean I need the crazy charts with the spider webs and stuff like that, or disconnect experience? Like I have a whole plan. Yeah.
So Call of Cthulhu does thrive as an investigation more than anything else because you play to find out. The game doesn't equip you with like a lot of narrative like horror RPGs now. There's like a
There's like a adventure summary that says this happens of this. I think I see this in what's the Waterdeep heist. So they have adventure summary of the 4 different seasons.
the game doesn't work as well once it becomes problem solving. I think mechanically the game doesn't support saving the world very well. Even though saving the world often becomes like
the
objective
objective.
cult or whatever, that's where it mechanically starts to get less strong.
Mhm.
Because Call of Cthulhu, like I say, there's a shit ton of skills. So it's about discovering small things one by one, going to different places and unraveling the horrible things that you find. Once Call of Cthulhu starts becoming a game of how to deal with something, that just becomes what the players want to do. That's not supported by the system. So if you want to, I suppose my advice for coming up with a game for Call of Cthulhu is always make it an investigation first. Someone, I don't remember who, said that Call of Cthulhu was in a horror movie, terrible things happen. In Call of Cthulhu, you come after the terrible things happen and find out what happened.
Uh-huh.
And then terrible things happen to you after that. Because
Yeah, go ahead.
if, let's take a movie, for example, like a slasher film, right?
Yep.
In Call of Cthulhu, you are the investigators, you are the police. Afterwards, trying to find out what the hell killed like all these horny teenagers.
And then like
As opposed to seeing the people in the camp getting murdered in real time. Then it becomes like a dread game or something else.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just trying to help wrap this idea around players' heads and GM's heads a little bit. What do you think is the difference between problem solving versus investigation? Because sometimes it can be the same thing.
That's true. Investigation is playing to find out. I think you have to be curious if you want to enjoy co-op, as opposed to being like, okay, everything's fucked, we're all gonna die, as opposed to going quest to quest, just achieving things. Like Achievement Hunter playing isn't great. Like going to a place trying to achieve something, trying to achieve something, to endeavor to do something is a very futile thing.
Yeah,
In the end, you can aspire to, okay, I want to get this, I want to do this, and that generally that can be quite rewarding. In Call of Cthulhu, you just set yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah.
If you go into a bar believing and expecting and hoping to God that you will come out with the objective that you had in mind, then that's just less fun than going in to just try to glean whatever you can. Call of Cthulhu is a learning experience.
Yeah. I think, it's just one of the harder kind of thought patterns or frame of, it's a harder frame of mind for a lot of players to embrace.
And as a game master trying to make a Call of Cthulhu scenario, I think it's a mistake to give players particularly like adverse things to overcome. That's not the point. They're probably not going to overcome them. Right? They're probably not gonna do shit against Cthulhu.
Yeah.
But the fun is in finding out what will happen and the conditions required for Cthulhu to be raised. The more you throw at them that, you expect them or that they will need to solve, the more tiresome it just becomes because they're just quite weak. I made a mistake in one of my first games where I forced like a boss fight. Mm-hmm. I just made really draggy. And I remember the game I ran for you in the asylum. It was just problem after problem that I was expecting you to be able to figure out. But that wasn't great. It was far more fun when it was me like leading you on a rapid, down a rabbit hole, as opposed to giving you things to solve.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, even though it is investigation that you want to solve, it's in an investigation you gather information and then piece it together afterwards, as opposed to just puzzle after puzzle.
Yeah. I think one of the things about CoC that I appreciate about CoC is that a lot of at least the way the games that you run the way you run certain games is that it's all about D&D. It's always, I roll dice and I want to insight check this guy, or I want to look around the room for something, and you find a letter that explains. It's like a lore dump, and it explains everything. Is that yes, there is a letter, but it's not the full picture. It's always like a letter that's addressed to someone, and meet you at this time. And it's not lead, it's always like that, right? But it's very cryptic. There are words that have like different meanings. It could mean different things, and it's up to you as a player to piece it together. So it feels like an investigation rather than a dice game that I just roll. And the dice says I succeed, so I succeed. And so I will know the answer to this mystery. So I think stuff like that is what makes a CoC game CoC. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember there was one letter in every time Mr. Mirrors is run. There's the red herring letter from the mother that always gets overinflated. Oh my god, this is the most crucial piece of information we have. When it's just a letter written to the cult leader by his mother.
Spoilers for your game, by the way.
Just one. Oh yeah, if you're gonna play Mr. Mirrors, just you didn't hear that.
Yeah.
But yeah, stuff like that. The letters are my favorite part. In a lot of like video games, at least, there's a lot of lore dumping in letters itself, which I think is not great. But in Call of Cthulhu, it works because that's immersion. In a game, you're already immersed by having an FPS or seeing the world in front of you in a 3D space. That's where the immersion lies. I don't think you need to scatter like PNG letters all around a video game to be immersed. Whereas in an RPG, you're sitting at a table. Immersion's not great. It's all in your mind's eye. Giving you letters in a live RPG, I consider that to be immersive in contrast to like a video game. Because documents and letters are a real part of everyday life. And handouts are the one thing I always focus on in Call of Cthulhu. Because there's no board, there's no like battle map that I use myself, but some people do. So props, costume, and handouts, letters, documents are what really make a Call of Cthulhu game like immersive. That's how you scale it out.
For sure. You brought up points about battle grids and stuff like that. Personally, for me, even when I run CoC, I draw a map or some sort as well, just so that everybody knows where everyone is.
Yeah.
Like the first time I pulled out the map, the players were like, "Oh my god, we're going to combat mode." And I was very quick to turn it down. I was like, "No, this is not combat. I'm just enjoying the map, the house, so we know where everyone is, and nobody tells me like, oh, I'm actually in the living room while everyone's exploring the kitchen, and something crazy happens in the kitchen." Yeah. So
of course, I've got maps too. I meant was like a straight up like direct visual aid of the space because it's a horror game. If I just give you a picture,
you're 6 squares away from the I don't think we want to be technical in this game either. But yeah, I guess on that note, would you recommend first time keeper of the Forbidden Lore to write their own adventure or like just run a pre-written one?
I'd say run a pre-written one because this is gonna sound really elitist, but like it's rooted in some very complex fiction. And unless you are like deeply familiar with Lovecraft and cosmic horror and the nature of what a Lovecraftian story would be like, you should probably like run a pre-written one first to see how they go, or go beyond just RPG. It would be great if you were to read horror fiction in general. It doesn't have to be Lovecraft.
Yeah.
If you read any work of horror fiction, it's probably inspired by Lovecraft anyway, because he essentially invented modern horror beyond the gothic fiction genre. So most horror books can be traced back to. So if you're an avid horror reader, that's as good research as running more games or reading other people's scenarios. But if you were to start, I would definitely recommend running a pre-written ones, because there's lots of great writers out there, and especially like for pre-written games. In the end, you homebrew whatever, fine, that's great for you. But with smaller RPGs, the pre-written ones really deserve attention.
And are there any particular ones you would recommend for first time a person who's running the game?
The starter set's a great place to start.
I would imagine, since it's
I started with that as well.
Yeah. I would imagine because it's called the starter set.
Yeah, I've never run the ones in the Keeper rulebook itself, because those actually to me seem a bit more complex. Instead of giving you like a linear path, they give you a bunch of clues and happenings that you can just place throughout the game. So there is like a difference. There are like sandbox games and more linear games of you go this and this happens. But either way, most of the time pre-written adventures give you characters and give you motivations. Not that different in style from any other pre-written game for any other system. But some of them are quite saucy.
Yeah.
It's like this 2-volume that you go to different countries. But that's not for a beginner, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I guess since this podcast episode is for GMs, can go a little bit into the adventure that I started with. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but the way it started was like your friend or your uncle or whoever it is on their deathbed.
Rupert Merriweather, Doors to Darkness.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so
very iconic one. I read that as well.
Yeah, and then
it was my first one.
Yeah, and discover that your friend or your uncle has been involved in some shady business when he was younger, and now all his friends are dead, and he's like one of the dead ones. And you discover the house, like a haunted house, and figure out what the hell's going on there and stuff like that. So I think that one did a pretty good job in terms of setting the tone and giving players into what a typical CoC game is like. Yeah, that's why I liked about that one. if you're coming from something like 5e, you may experience a bit of a culture shock in a sense where you can go through an entire 3-4 hour session with zero combat. Yeah, and rather than thinking, hey, that sounds like pretty boring to my players or whatever, I encourage you to give it a try because it's engaging in a different way and trying to find out really what is happening. And it's really fun when your players start to also role play with each other. This system encourages by putting all your characters into very unique situations and bringing up their phobias and things like that. That's fun.
I remember what I wanted to say about mechanics specific to Call of Cthulhu now.
Okay, go ahead.
So as the GM, right, gaslighting, because to expand on like the sanity thing, right?
Yeah.
My favorite way to use it is to lie to you, to tell you one thing and then later say, no, I never said that. Which in any other game wouldn't be great.
Yeah.
In a horror game like this, that kind of like confusion and just the amount that you can frustrate your player with that.
So give us an example of this.
Sewers in Mr. Mirrors, there's a sewer where they're chased by something, stalked by some manner of entity down there, and a lot of the time they're in complete pitch darkness.
Yeah.
It's supernatural darkness, so you put your hand in front and it's gone. You can't see your hand anymore. So usually they all hold on to each other, and sometimes it comes in very casually. If there's 5 players, I just sometimes say, all right, the 6 of you go on, or I'll say something like you see something there, and then, or I'll say very quickly, tell a player, you see your mother, and then the player will go, wait, what? I go, what? What did he say?
The
I
very
think that's one of the most unique things, well, not in the game itself, but that you can do in the game that you probably shouldn't do in other games.
yeah, it's a horror game. So I think that's one of the typical horror tropes, right? Seeing there that are actually not there, or starting to hear things, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's completely fine.
And there was this one time they were all like in the sewers because it's a very narrow path. They were all held together by a rope.
Yep.
Tied around.
Well, they always do that. Like,
Yeah.
they always do that. Even in my game, they were like that. I was like, no, okay, guarantee you right now, you're wasting time.
And there was this player that was at the back of the line. The character was at the back of the line. Then suddenly she realized that there was another person holding onto the rope behind her.
Yeah.
And one of the great things is, it's more fun dramatically. I think beyond Call of Cthulhu, just for any RPG, it's more fun for you to prompt dramatic questions like that, as opposed to say you feel someone behind you. What do you do? What I did was you feel someone holding the rope behind you. Instead of saying what do you do, I asked, would you like to turn around? No, it's just so much more terrifying than what would you want to do.
I'm just gonna pretend my friend is behind me for the rest of the game.
And it was. What actually happened was they all just got mixed up.
Yeah.
But this character didn't know this, and nobody else knew this.
Yeah.
So when she turned around, which she finally did, she just saw it was the other character.
Yeah, that was a pretty fun sequence that I went through as well. All right. I guess one of the things you wanted to talk about was why C matters. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Came out in 1981, written by Sandy Peterson, who is still alive and still making wonderful games to this day, and still supporting Call of Cthulhu and writing things for it. Sandy Peterson is essentially the godfather of a lot of horror gaming today. Because Call of Cthulhu has, just like how D&D has largely influenced all of modern video games that people don't realize, Cthulhu influenced horror gaming a lot. In fact, it was Sandy Peterson and S.T. Joshi, who was a literary critic who wrote about Lovecraft a lot, that were responsible for popularizing Lovecraft in the 21st century, in the contemporary world in general. Because Lovecraft, like most writers, was obscure as hell for most of his life and even after his life. It took the popularization of Lovecraftian gaming that made Lovecraft and his flavor of horror popular. Sandy Peterson also later made Arkham Horror, the board game, which has led to the infinite number of Lovecraftian board games
Expansions.
now. The horror, not just for Arkham Horror, but in general, in board games, there are so many like horror board games now that owe their legacy to Call of Cthulhu and Sandy Peterson.
Yeah.
Video games as well, horror games, anything with a sanity meter or like a stress meter, those can all be traced back to Call of Cthulhu. And it was an industry dominated by fantasy, TTRPG, in the 70s.
Till
And
it's
every RPG, you just associate it with fantasy, with people, sword and sorcery, high elves, and all that. But then Call of Cthulhu came out, and it added flavor, it added diversity. It wasn't just witches, it wasn't just wizards and rogues and magic anymore. It added a nuance and new flavor to role playing, along with many other games that would come after that. Call of Cthulhu was I think the first like non-fantasy, non-format game to come out after D&D.
and gave like players a brand new experience, like
Yes.
something that is distinctive about it.
And it's brought a lot of people to Lovecraft's work. And even in his life, Lovecraft and a bunch of other pulp writers encourage each other to use each other's work and build off it in one of the early versions of a shared literary universe known as the Cthulhu mythos and other things. Like Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, Robert Bloch, the writer of Psycho, Stephen King and Neil Gaiman, everyone's contributed to the Cthulhu mythos. Everyone's written about stuff that Lovecraft originally came up with. And everyone's contributed to this huge, wonderful world. So even if you don't like Lovecraft, which is understandable, right? Call of Cthulhu is a game of more than just Lovecraft anymore. He may have made the world originally, but there are so many wonderful people throughout history who have added on to this world and who have shared in this beautiful creation process of absolute pessimism.
Yeah,
And
I
to this day, the Cthulhu mythos is built on by all these writers now.
Yeah, I think you don't have to run a Lovecraftian game with Call of Cthulhu. It could be a slasher flick. It could be, what's that? It could be Get Out. It could be.
And like I say, it doesn't work so well as a slasher unless you come in
Yeah.
after the slasher. Because still, investigation is the best way to use it. But you could run it as slasher. The sanity works quite well for slashers because you make dumb decisions.
Yeah.
In the style of a slasher film, you trip over nothing. That's something sanity can help you with.
For sure. All right, I think a little bit back into running the game. How do you advise GMs prep for a CoC game?
Make sure your handouts make sense. Because for me, I use my handouts as my second most important way to tell a story, aside from the investigation itself and rolling the normal gameplay. There'll be 3 or 4 letters, and they're all referring to each other.
Yeah.
Or they're referring to something in game. If you spot one mistake, that can ruin the whole thing, because to me, it's really about the detail of what appears in a letter, makes or breaks the investigation. It's fine if it's vague, but it has to be... Okay, no, it's not fine if it's vague. But it can be cryptic, not vague. A slight difference. But it can be cryptic, but it has to be very specific in what it's trying to do or what it's trying to say. If it gets misinterpreted, that's fine. Normally, you can make a roll to try to help a player, but yeah, to prep for it, I think the handouts are the most important thing you really want to pay attention to. Aside from that, not much difference from any RPG. Make sure you've got good music. Make sure you know the rules. Make sure you're familiar with your scenario. Make sure you understand the investigation. Make sure you understand what has happened. Because like the onion method, there's the event and there's all the things that happen that surround it that you want to unpeel. Make sure you know what you're trying to unpeel at that time. Make sure you know what question you're posing to your player in the moment.
And what do you do when your players are stuck doing this investigation, or you see them go a really far off way? You completely misunderstood all the clues that you've given them, and they're going in a direction that's not where the adventure is supposed to go.
Sometimes I just straight up tell them to read the letters again if they
Yeah.
go too far. But a lot of the time, I usually engage in the conversation with them, because they'll be sitting, talking to each other, trying to figure things out. And I'll join in and talk with them, because I want to know what they're thinking as well.
Yeah.
In Call of Cthulhu, I'm not just there to find out what you want to do. I want to know what you think is happening. At least because I write my own adventures, right?
Yeah.
I'm very curious how you see it. Because I know the whole story already. I wrote everything. I know the whole mystery. I'm really intrigued to find out what someone who doesn't know what's happening completely, with the information I've given you, how much are you able to piece together? And that's what I find really fun as a GM, is seeing how other people process the cryptic shit I give them. You know,
You don't-
and it's amazing when they get it.
Yeah. You told me a story once about a group that you GM for, and
Yeah.
they were talking about the mystery. And the very first theory, they got it.
Yep.
But then they kept overcomplicating things, and then they were like,
Yes.
"It's that easy." And then like they make things more and more complicated, and in the end, they were like, "Yeah."
After the game ended, they spent the first 15 minutes like looking at every letter and piecing things together, and they got it. Then they kept talking for another hour.
And they went further left field.
Yeah, it became like a huge like global conspiracy, you know, and there was like a interconnected family tree that they pieced together somehow.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a mark of a good COC. Players are doing a better job than you at creating a mystery and use it for the next game.
Yeah.
Yeah. In between games, do you kind of tweak the way this adventure is run? If players of a different play group come in and they're like, I can't solve this, or they go very differently. How often do you like tweak the adventure?
It's a good question. I don't think I have yet. Whether I should have is another thing. What do you mean by tweak? Make it easier, change?
Yeah. So, for example, going by the example you talked about earlier, let's say the players they read the letters and then they're like they get really stuck because they don't know what to do or where the needs are and things like that. So you then be like, okay, next session, next group of players, I'm going to make the letters a little bit more obvious, slightly less cryptic. How do you balance it?
I've never changed my letters before. I like to keep them consistent. There's very specific information there I want to convey that I think doesn't work well if I try to edit it between games.
Mhm.
Also, because I just don't want to, if I'm being entirely honest. In terms of tweak, I suppose I have added like NPCs before that weren't always there to help a party move along.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's somebody's father or like one of the key NPCs in Misty Mirrors. Sometimes he dies, sometimes he doesn't die. Sometimes they have somebody else helping them. But that depends on what they achieve in the game as well. I don't really endeavor outside of the game to try to find a way to make it easier for them.
Yeah.
Cause,
Just direct them and get things moving.
yeah, because I feel like changing things in a game as well, it's not that intricate, but in a game where investigation is important,
Yeah.
changing things in between can just convolute it a lot, I think. I don't think it helps me or the players. Because, again, since I write my games, I can't say much for running a pre-written one, because I'm not as experienced in that. But when you're writing your own Call of Cthulhu game, changing things between games isn't very helpful for me.
Okay. We'll come to the last question we're going to ask you. How do you come up with these ideas for a serious game?
I'm very scared. I am a deeply anxious person, as was H.P. Lovecraft and most other horror writers. I try my best to make you understand what that's like. That's pretty much it. Because with comedy, right? If I'm trying to make somebody else amused, I want to amuse myself first.
Yeah.
I make sure I find it funny. Because if I don't find it funny, nobody else will. I can't make it funny for anybody else. Same thing for horror. If this idea, or if what I'm describing doesn't terrify me, or I don't find it creepy, then I probably won't be able to translate it well to you. So Misty Mirrors I came up with mainly because I wanted to make a tutorial RPG intro scenario. I wanted to make a cult game, a very classic one, but without giving too many spoilers, I wanted to make my own take on Doppelganger. Because I found it I find it quite scary when someone's not just a copy of you. It's fine to just see someone who looks like you.
Yeah.
But when someone is you or is more than you and is better than you. Because I'm constantly in fear that somebody's gonna replace me in any part of my life.
Yeah. Negative
Whether
shadow.
whether it's in class,
Yeah.
someone comes in who's funnier than me, or someone who also is a bearded brown man who just does everything I do but better. Because for most of my life, I've always been quite a unique person. When someone comes who's a bit more unique than me, or is me but better, I get very threatened.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I try to put that in Misty Mirrors. Hotel Relier is me screaming to the abyss because of my anxieties with sleep and my rocky abusive relationship I have with sleep and dreaming.
I was gonna ask if you wanted to plug anything at the end of the at the end of the. I guess you just did 2 adventures and you're running for Tableminis.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think just to give everyone some context also. So Feroz is games, CoC minis, and what they do is typically like short adventures, so about 4 to 5 sessions each time. So that's why Feroz, you were mentioning about how important it is to have an NPC there to move players along, rather than they dwell too much in one session because you only have 4 or 5 sessions to get to the end. Maybe that's not necessary for some of our GMs who are GMing their own games at home and you have the luxury of time and stuff like that. Maybe if you don't want to guide your players, you can, but I would say still it's nice to have a bit of give players a sense of urgency rather than at the end of the session, 3-4 hours, they felt like they've done nothing. Nothing has been accomplished. Yeah, like I mentioned, like we've been mentioning, CoC is a game where progression is not about the character, but the information you gain in the story. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we've come to the end of today's episode.
Let me add for the ideas, but actually,
For sure.
I say I inject my anxieties into a game most of the time, but I don't start there. I don't start writing a scenario thinking, okay, I've had some terrible sleep the past. I usually discover that afterwards. So like I said, Mr. Mirrors, I start with the concept lah. I start with something cool I want to do. I wanted to make a doppelganger game and the classic introductory Call of Cthulhu game. That was the original seed for Mr. Mirrors. And then I added my anxiety of being replaced. Hotel Relier, I started because I wanted to see what I could do with the classic hotel story. Because every like horror writer has a hotel story. So I wanted to see what I could do with a hotel. And then I realized hotels were a place where you have great sleep. Hotel beds are great. And I think about hotel beds I've been in. And I realized that I am a slave to sleep. And I am at the mercy of Morpheus and the gods of dreaming. And yeah, so then I wanted to make a hotel story. And I decided, you know what, because it's a hotel, I'll talk about how unfun sleep can be. And I tried to make beds as terrifying as possible.
Interesting. So if you're interested in learning about how scary beds can be, please sign up at tableminis.com and you'll find all of our adventures under there as well. Feroz, is there anything else you would like to add before we end today's episode?
I have a question for you, Nick.
What is that question?
What's the scariest experience you've had with a bed?
I'm not sure if it's safe to say on air.
The second scary.
The bed is the scariest part for me is my bed faces, when I turn to the right of my bed, it faces like the sky on the outside and the sky. And in the dark, in the deepest dark and like loneliest nights, you sleep in your bed and you look out into the night sky and you start to extrapolate and think about how small you are in the world. Yeah, I think those are the moments and you start to, or if you're in bed and you start to look at the corner of your room, not sure if something's there or not, and your mind starts filling in the blanks.
You're a bit scared of the bed itself.
No, I love my bed. I can relate to theory of bed, but I can relate to feelings of fear while I'm on the bed. Yeah. At night, your anxiety, that's where your anxieties come, right? Before you sleep quiet of night.
I've come to hate my bed.
Why?
I'm a slave to it.
All right, cool. Feroz, it's been great talking to you,
You too, Nickel.
and we'll see you again soon. Hopefully.
Yes.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Okay.